Welcome everyone to the TTM Talk podcast, where we talk all things F1 and TTM. Joining me today as my wonderful co-host, I have TTM Brenda
Hello there.
and our very first guest in TTM, Billy, or Chew Billy as you might know him.
Hi there. Hi there.
This week, for our first ever podcast, we're going to be reviewing the 2020 F1 season. There were lots of highs, lots of lows. What did you guys sort of make of the overall season that we had?
Um, yeah, I think it was a very interesting season, obviously with the whole sort of COVID thing around. It made it a bit unpredictable with where we were going to be racing, and I think a bit of an insight of pre-season testing with how the teams were going to fare, but I don't think that tells the full story. So we were all very excited for the first leg at Austria, which then sort of showed where the teams were at, and yeah, I think that one of for a long time in Formula One, in terms of how sort of the midfield was shaken up and things like that.
Yeah, you said about pre-season testing. There were two big story points coming out of pre-season testing. One of them being the Ferrari and their engine not being so good.
Yeah, the Ferrari engine obviously was very controversial in the 2019 season for how fast it was, or how fast it made the car in a straight line. And then magically in the 2020 season, it took a sudden turn for the worse, very much down on power compared to the other teams, which affected it hugely during the season, and affected their results a lot, including their placing in the constructors. Um, but yeah, and then obviously in the other part of preseason testing was the new uh, DAS system from Mercedes, which was unveiled and then banned a few days later, I believe, for the 2021 season. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm not here to talk all by myself. We've also got obviously Jubilee. We want to hear from you as well.
Yeah, yeah, sort of expanding on what you were going on about the first race of the season, sort of the unpredictable result due to the amount of retirements they had. I feel that I'm right in thinking that was one of the highest retirement rates from any race last season.
Yeah, I remember
Was it
there was
11 finishes?
yeah, it was pretty crazy, wasn't it? Because I mean, Mercedes were doing Mercedes things just out in front, miles ahead, and then they all came, their engineers came over the radio being like, "Oh, watch out for the curbs. Definitely stay off the curbs. Lewis Bottas, we need you to stay off the curbs." Uh, and then we had, I think, was it Kvyat whose engine blew up, at which brought out a safety car, and then we had Raikkonen's wheel coming off, um, Albon making a move on Hamilton, Albon getting,
Russell lost his gearbox, I believe,
was it
as
Russell?
well.
Yeah, and then
Russell lost something half mid
oh
race, which brought out safety car.
yeah, and then
I
we
think
had
Kvyat had a puncture.
oh yeah, didn't his tire explode or something?
Yeah, I think it was down the main straight going into turn one. I think he had a puncture.
And then obviously on the safety car restart, Albon tried to make that move around the outside of Hamilton. Once again, Hamilton took a podium away from him. But luckily, that let, I know, Brenda's favourite driver, Leclerc, and Norris get on the podium.
One of
So,
my favourites.
yeah, a crazy start to the season. If you'd have
Yeah.
said Norris would be on the podium, or if you'd have said we're going to have 13 different podium finishers in this season, I'd have been like, nah, get out of
Yeah.
here. It's going to be Mercedes and Red Bull.
Also, due to Norris podium on the first race and Hamilton being demoted off it, Norris being the leading British driver was the first time that Hamilton hadn't been since, I believe, Jenson Button the 2009 season. So a long time since anyone other than Lewis Hamilton, a British driver other than
Yeah,
Lewis
that
Hamilton, had led the champ or been above him in the championship.
that was crazy, and the amount of records that Hamilton then went on to break that season or this season was just insane. Like he got beat Schumacher's pole record, Schumacher's win record, obviously equalled Schumacher's title record, and there's numerous other ones. I was looking through an article the other day, and it was like 49 records that he's either equalled or broken, and it's just
Yeah.
it's ridiculous.
Well, he also went for the free wheel record as well, didn't he?
Yeah. So then,
Finishing a race with only 3 wheels.
obviously,
Yeah,
we
I
had this.
think
Well, go on.
I think that first race, just going back to that was like sort of the perfect um, metaphor, if you will, to how the rest of the season was going to go. Just complete madness from start to finish. Obviously, with Mercedes looking like they're going to take off into the distance, but then something else happens and it sort of brings the midfield back, which then could sort of keep up. Like they weren't that slow, and a very good midfield fight, I think, this season as well.
Yeah, one way that I'd what's the word? Review the whole season is, on the one hand, it was really boring because I mean we had Hamilton, Bottas, Verstappen being like the second most common podium in F1 history, but then behind that we had, you know, Albon, McLarens, Renaults, Racing Points, Ferraris, Alpha Tauris, this massive midfield battle, all trying to be best of the rest.
Yeah, something I liked about the season was the fact that if any one of those three, like Hamilton, Bottas, knocked off that podium, it sort of opened it up to any other driver in the top 10 to go and get it. And it sort of made it really unpredictable as to who would get on the podium. It was really predictable and unpredictable at the same time.
As someone mentioned earlier as well, with COVID obviously affecting the season massively, we got that first calendar that had 8 races on it. One thing that I loved about this season was going to different tracks, and we had the likes of Portimao and Mugello being new tracks that we saw to the calendar, and then the returning favourites of like Turkey and Imola, Nürburgring, and even new circuit layouts like the outer layer at Bahrain were used. So I found that as something really exciting that happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I really enjoyed the Nürburgring race, not just because Ricardo got the podium, but I just found although it didn't offer loads of overtaking opportunities, it was a different style of track to what we tend to see repeated each week. It almost had a little bit of like little bit of a hungry feel to it.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I mean the the Nürburgring has always been like a well-loved track, and like we were talking about the other tracks as well. Imola, I think, I don't know if that was mentioned or not. Another amazing track, and that also provided another amazing race. So
It was
I
a
think,
different style of race, really, wasn't it? Because it's not the
yeah,
widest track for overtaking, so it posed a lot of close battles that stayed close, if you get what I mean.
yeah,
Because even though the slower car was in front, it was almost a bit Monaco-esque of they couldn't necessarily overtake easily. They had to be stuck behind for a few laps and really figure out where they were going to overtake.
yeah. I think it was a real challenge for all the drivers this season, but it was also really good for the viewers to watch.
Yeah,
yeah, jumping back to that Imola thought as well. I loved watching Verstappen trying to get back past Bottas. Obviously, Bottas had the bit of Vettel's front wing sucking his barge boards, but seeing Verstappen every lap just trying to get the best exit out of the last corner to try and like maximise that run down the straight, and then when he finally got past, that was pretty mega. I thought.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I agree. Great move by Verstappen. I think obviously Verstappen, one of like, well, nearly the only driver to be able to challenge the Mercedes up front, and he was always sort of close by. That if anything went wrong, he was there to sort of take it. And like you say at Imola, with Bottas taking damage in those first few laps, he was quite slow for the rest of the race in comparison to Hamilton. And Verstappen was just sat there and waiting for something for Bottas to make a mistake, which he did. And then obviously he just swooped past. It was a shame that Verstappen retired from that race, to be honest, because he made a great move on Bottas, and
Yeah, definitely.
he definitely deserved it.
Yeah, I feel Ricardo getting his second podium there, that one was more luck than what happened at the Nürburgring, due to obviously Verstappen retiring, and then for some reason Perez's pit crew deciding to pit him for fresh tyres, even though his tyres were newer than everyone else's that he was in front of anyway, and then
Yeah,
losing those positions. And
yeah.
they saw all race how difficult it was to overtake. So I feel with the amount of laps left, which I believe it was about 5, if I'm right in thinking, after that safety car,
It was,
maybe
yeah,
6
it
or
was
7.
low. It was low.
It was low, and so yeah, strategy wise, I feel that that's what gave Ricardo that podium. The other team messing up more so than a good strategy from Renault for that one.
Yeah, I agree.
And as someone picked up earlier about the unpredictableness of the season, one track that I thought encompassed that the most was Turkey. Obviously, uh, it used to be a track fan favorite. Even everyone thought coming into the weekend that we'd be going around the famous quadruple left-hander like flat out, not really worrying about it, and then it turns out that there's just no grip.
Yeah, Turkey. What a race that was. Um, it is Turkey, isn't it? I'm right in saying that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I that's the track I was thinking of when you was
Yeah.
describing it.
Um, that was obviously an amazing race. Obviously, we had a brand new pole sitter of Stroll to start with. And a great lap, I have to say. A bit um feel sorry a little bit for Verstappen in that sense because he'd been quickest so far. Felt like I think it was nearly all of the sessions in the
Yeah,
wet, only to have it taken away from him in the last part of qualifying by a racing point. Um, so and then obviously in the race, Stroll losing it down to I think it was a bit of damage actually under his front wing. They found out, which was
yeah.
causing a lot of blistering on the tyres.
There was also a bit of when he was out in front, I because he built a 15-second gap, didn't he? The start of the race, he just took off and no one could touch him for
Yeah,
so long. And then when he was asked to pit, I think I'm right in saying that he refused over the radio, saying why. And then after that, it all just seemed to go downhill for him.
yeah, that was one of the
yeah. They asked him to pit. The they asked him to pit because of the blistering on his tyres, which was caused because of the front wing damage.
Oh, right, okay.
and I think realistically they want it to be out on those. Well, the one I don't think you can really call them inters, the uh, worn down inters that are basically slicks, which then
Yeah,
obviously
Yeah,
Hamilton came through the pack after having a shocking qualifying for Mercedes standards to come and clinch his 7th world title.
yeah. I think obviously Hamilton very dominant all year um throughout the entire season of the driver who was able to pull away from the rest of the pack. Um, and obviously this year as well, leading the Black Lives Matter um, protest, I guess you could call it. Um, but yeah, I mean, very dominant driving from Hamilton, clinching that title in
mm,
Turkey after coming back through the pack
yeah,
on an amazing strategy on those very worn down inters. Um, to take the win, a very unlikely win, I think, for
yeah.
Mercedes, which they weren't expecting.
Yeah, personally, I would say that that was his race of the season. He sort of showed that even anyone that was in a good car can sort of race, but to pull off the strategy with the tyres in the state they were and to sort of drive the way he did on them in the conditions, I believe did show that although he might get a lot of hate for obviously being in the best car, which does play a part, it does show that he was also a good driver.
Yeah, that's one thing I wanted to bring up
Yeah,
as
I
well.
agree.
Is there's always this argument of, oh, he's got the best car, and it does play a massive part. There's no denying that. But then he's in that car because he is an incredible driver. He's shown that time after time. I'm not the biggest fan of him. I can respect, all that he's done, and I'm only not a fan because I want to see mixed up racing at the front. I want the midfield battling for the win every week. Um, but yeah, that drive in Turkey, where the two racing points could have won, both Red Bulls could have won, all of them probably should have won, but Hamilton kept his head. And while I know Bottas had damage, but all season Bottas hasn't held a candle to him. He's, you know, made mistakes, had bad races, had bad starts, not being able to, fight his way through. And yeah, Hamilton just wiped the floor with him basically.
Yeah, yeah. I feel based on the point you were making then, sort of thing, the best car does play a point, and it proves that it doesn't. It's not just he's in the best car, but I feel the Russell incident of him racing at in the Chicago Grand Prix did almost prove it a little bit of the fact he's jumped straight into it and just sort of he was at the front of the grid happily. He pulled away from everyone easily, and it's so unfortunate that he had the issues he did with the pit stops and then the puncture, because I think otherwise he would have gone on to win that race, which for Hamilton's sake wouldn't have helped him in terms of everyone saying it's just the car, because it would have almost reinforced that point a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with that. But then the only counterpoint I'd bring up
Yeah,
is with Bottas, is that Bottas has been in that car all season, and yet Russell outshone him. He was quicker in practice. I know Bottas got pole, but it was only by like a tiny margin. And then in the race, Russell was straight past him, wasn't letting go of that lead until, like you said, the unfortunate pit stops and punctures.
Yeah, I almost feel that that was Bottas's race. I felt was lost mentally to Russell. Obviously, it was the biggest point in the media all weekend. Russell to Mercedes for the weekend. What will he achieve? Everything like that. And will Bottas be able to keep him behind? And or will Russell beat him? And I feel that that got into Bottas's head a little bit. He sort of was concentrating so much on not letting it happen that he almost let his driving slip because of it.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, obviously Russell was very close to him in qualifying, so that might have played a part in it. But yeah, Bottas just with a bad start again. He's not been very on form with his starts this season.
Yeah,
Um,
you carry on, sorry.
and that just sort of paved the way for Russell to sort of take it away and then just drive away. I mean, even with a Russell would have got ahead, or not. If Bottas's bad start, Russell would have got ahead, but then Russell was able to pull away and not stay, or Bottas wasn't able to stay with him after that happened. Um,
Oh no, yeah, 100% that. Because if I don't think there was contact with Bottas on the first corner or first slash second corner, but he did lose the rear, didn't he? He dropped it a little bit and recaught it, and that really allowed
yeah,
Russell to jump away.
he had a bit of a bad turn one. I think he was pushed a little bit wide. There was no contact, I don't think, but he was pushed a little bit wide and just like lost it on the curb a little bit. Had to back out the throttle and then just like lost a load of positions because of it.
Yeah,
Um, obviously, later on in the race, we had Russell's problems with tyres as well as Bottas down the field, but that did pave the way for Perez to take an unlikely win. He's also his first in F1 after I think 7 or 8 podiums now.
yeah,
Um,
Yeah, it
So I
was
think well
190
deserved for Perez.
races.
Yeah, I think well deserved for Perez to get that win. I think he did deserve a win at some point, and it was sort of unlikely that it was going to happen, considering that he didn't have a seat for next season
And the fact that
after the season had finished.
he's the only driver in F1 history to have fallen or to have been last on lap one and still come through to win the race. Because obviously there was that incident with
Yeah,
Verstappen and Leclerc. So yeah, Mega Drive, which yeah, like you said, hadn't got a seat at this point, and I mean he'd been putting in stellar performances up until then, but maybe that was the final nail in the coffin for that Red Bull drive.
Yeah,
yeah.
I
I, I think he was definitely sort of on the cards for a Red Bull seat, obviously with the like question marks above Albon. Um, and then, like you say, it was just the final sort of nail in the coffin for Red Bull to say, yeah, we want him in our car. To be last on lap one and then come back through to win it is an incredible achievement,
yeah,
especially with the shorter layout as well. So, yeah, I think a great drive from Perez.
Yeah, and in
yeah.
Red Bull,
Going to the Al, oh, sorry,
no, you go ahead, mate.
going to the Albon point that you made of sort of obviously they dropped Albon. I think personally that I think it was Nurburgring, which was what almost sealed his fate in terms of the final nail in the coffin for Albon. Was he wasn't in great positions. I think it was seventh or eighth, but then just because he had a lot of pressure behind him, he dropped it coming out of a corner and then finished completely out of the points when there was no real need to do that. If you sort of understand what I mean, it
Yeah, was that
they
where
no one could get past.
he said they raced me so hard at Nurburgring?
Uh, sorry, I'm thinking Imola actually. Nurburgring was where he caught Kvyat's wing
Oh
and then
yeah,
was racing with Pierre Gasly, and
yeah,
then said they're racing me so hard. And it was Imola where he was running an eighth after that safety car restart, and then dropped it coming out of the corner where I believe Verstappen ended up after he had that rear suspension or tyre failure. He sort of dropped it, getting on the power too early there, and lost all the positions.
yeah. There have been too many times where, like in Sakia, you know, the Mercedes are taken out the equation, Verstappen's out the equation. That's where Red Bull need that second driver to go and win the race. But again,
Yeah,
Albon's constantly stuck in the midfield. I mean, he's got two podiums, is it? That's the same that Gasly's got in a Alpha Tauri, well, slash Toro Rosso. But the amount of times that Albon should be finishing fourth and he's just not because he's just in that midfield pack. And yeah, maybe he's got the pace if he wasn't racing them, but the fact he has bad qualifyings or bad starts, or he's not aggressive on the first lap, whatever it is, it puts him in that position where he shouldn't be.
yeah. But I mean, Leclerc got more podiums this season in the Ferrari than he was able to do in the Red Bull. That Verstappen has proved week after week is capable of the third place easily and challenges Bottas in the Mercedes. So to only finish with two podiums, I feel is what sealed his fate.
And I've
Yeah, and like you said, obviously comparing him Albon to Gasly, the same amount of podiums, but obviously Gasly was able to actually take the win at Monza this year. Um, an incredible drive to be able to hold off Sainz for those last final laps. I think a few more laps and Sainz, but Gasly held on to take that win in Monza, um, in a midfield car, which Albon was not able to do.
Yeah, I feel really bad for Sainz at that race because he was effectively best of the rest. I think because Bottas shot got another bad start. Um, Verstappen retired, and Sainz was second behind Hamilton before he got his penalty. But then, with the red flag that happened because of Leclerc's crash, I think Sainz had already pitted, whereas Gasly, Stroll, and I think Raikkonen and Giovinazzi had all stayed out. So under that red flag period, they could all change tyres. So obviously Sainz then kind of got screwed over by the red flag, but then having to fight his way back. I mean, obviously, great redemption story for Gasly, but I do feel bad for Sainz.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
And then
Um,
one thing that happened, which wasn't quite as cheery as the Perez and Gasly win, was at the Bahrain Grand Prix, where Grosjean had probably the worst crash I've ever seen in my years of watching F1.
Oh yeah, yeah, 100%.
I agree.
I mean, thankfully,
Um,
he's all okay. I think now he's got both hands out of bandages, and I think he's got some scarring on his right hand, which was more badly burnt. But that crash, I just couldn't believe my eyes.
yeah, it was huge. I mean, it was sort of it was kind of one of those things where you realise that it's not as safe as it looks when they crash, and um, obviously the fuel tank in the middle of the car, which then split in half. Um, and like you say, one of the biggest crashes I've ever seen in Formula One. Um, I think just because of the danger of it with the fire, obviously that's a huge sort of thing to happen, which doesn't happen really at all now in Formula One. So it was a huge shock to see that. But like you say, thankfully, Grosjean did get out of the car. Amazingly, he got out, and with help from the medical staff at the circuit, was able to get out and come off, I think, relatively unscathed for what actually happened. Obviously he had burns, but they weren't like major burns. Um, and that survival cell of the Formula One car holding up perfectly to keep him safe as he went through that barrier. I think Formula One has grown so much in the aspect of safety and keeping drivers alive after crashes like that. Because if that had happened, let's say, well, even 3 or 4 years ago, because of the angle that Grosjean went into that barrier, he wouldn't have survived that crash.
Yeah, 100%. I think, was it his Instagram he put it on, where he did his thank you message to everyone and everything, and they did put a video up saying that when they announced it and everything, he wasn't an advocate for the halo, but he's so thankful that it was there because it did save his life, that halo being there.
Yeah, and the advances that the FIA make in safety technology, like the only reason, well, I think it was only on his hands that he got burnt. But I think I didn't know this until after it happened. But this year they had new fireproof overalls that I think it changed from they were fire retardant for like 20 seconds rather than 10, but the gloves were still the old kind, so they were only resistant for like 10 seconds. And because I think he was in the car for 17 or 18 seconds, that's why all of his body is fine. It's just his hands obviously took
Yeah,
the most damage. But yeah, when I saw it, and it was the after bit where it didn't show the like crash site straight away. It was like a good 5 minutes before we saw anything. I was like, "Damn, this is bad." But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
like
They showed the replay, didn't they? They showed the replay, but they didn't actually show like the actual crash live sort of thing.
yeah, they didn't show like what was happening. So I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
I was like, this is this is really bad. But thankfully, because of all of the safety measures that we have, all of the the safety medical car drivers, all the marshals on track. Uh, Luckily, he
Yeah.
was able to walk away fairly unscathed.
Well, yeah. Well, the other thing was, is a lot of him getting out was done by himself, obviously unclipping the buckles, and he was mostly out and he was on the barrier by the time the marshal got there to pull him out over it. So it's the miracle that through the amount of G's, I can't remember exactly how many G's they said that he would have felt going into that crash, but to not have been knocked out or unconscious and sat there, I think is the miracle that really saved him.
Yeah. So anyway, moving on from quite a sad topic, we're gonna introduce to our podcast one of the fan favourites from the TTM YouTube channel. It's top 10 moments, and we've listed our top 10 moments from the 2020 season. So I'll start off with number 10. In 10th place, we put Stroll's pole, his first pole position, and he was able to master the conditions around Turkey. A very tricky day. Verstappen should have probably been on pole, but Stroll was just able to put that lap together and got his first ever pole position.
Yeah, it was a great lap from Stroll. We can't fault him on it. It was the changing conditions sort of changed at the, I'd say, the perfect time for his lap to then be put in.
And then
Yeah, and I think a bit of a confidence boost for Stroll. Obviously he was having a bit of a bad season up until Turkey, where he managed to get that pole.
Yeah,
I think it was a bit of a confidence boost for him. But yeah, we'll move on now.
Yeah, on to number 9. We have Hulkenberg's return. Obviously, with so much going on, it's quite easy to forget. But Hulkenberg did make technically three appearances when both Perez and Stroll came down with COVID. Obviously, at the first British Grand Prix, he had an engine issue, so couldn't start the race. But then he got to take part in the 70th anniversary race a week after, and then later on in the season at Nürburgring at his home race. And for being called up the day before each race, I think he did a superb job.
yeah. I mean, he qualified third, didn't he? In the, can't remember which one it was now.
It was
But
the
yeah,
70th anniversary.
yeah, it was the
Qualified.
70th. Yeah, you are right. Yeah, to jump in the car after being out for so long, and to qualify third, I think it shows how good a driver he is.
Yeah, I was so hoping for a Hulkenberg podium, but
Yeah,
didn't quite manifest. And I think even his drive in Nürburgring was probably more impressive because qualifying, he didn't do well. I think because he hadn't been there to do free practice or whatever. It was literally he came in Saturday morning and jumped in the car for qualifying. He qualified last. I don't think it was.
18th.
I can't remember, but he was pretty far down. But then in the race, he still managed to come through with good strategy and good racing to pick up points, which, I mean, from last to pick up points, especially in like a tough midfield, it's easy to get past the Williams, the Alfa Romeo that has, but then to pick off another, 4 or 5 drivers to get to the top 10, I think just shows the potential that he has.
Yeah, obviously Ocon retired from that race with an engine failure, I believe, or it might have been hydraulic failure. So that was another midfield car that sort of helped him in that battle to get into the points in that race.
And on to number 8 now. We have Russell and his Mercedes debut at the Sakir Grand Prix, putting on an exceptional performance. We touched on it earlier, but to jump in a completely new car that didn't fit him, he had to squeeze his big feet down into Lewis's small foot area, and to, perform better than Bottas in many respects, just shows the potential that he has in the future. Because I'm sure inevitably he will move up to Mercedes.
Yeah, I don't think there is a lot really to say about that race or Russell's appearance in Mercedes, apart from that he really showed his potential in the fastest car on the grid. Um, Definitely showed that he was worthy of that Mercedes seat, and it was just it was so unfortunate that he had those problems um, at the near the end of the race where Mercedes just messed it up, which we don't really usually see from them. But unfortunately, obviously a mixed tyre set on the car, which forced another stop, and then a puncture. Um, when he was looking at a definite podium, possibly even a win, to only scoring, I think it was 2 points with fastest lap. So I think it was 3 points in total. Um, he got it. It was robbed from him, 100%. But it definitely showed Mercedes and the rest of the grid that in the right car he can win races and possibly titles.
Yeah, definitely. On to number 7 now. We have Vettel and his redemption podium. So obviously Vettel had Leclerc coming in 2019, where previously he'd been the number one at the Ferrari. Leclerc changed up the formula. Uh, kind of, there were moments in 2019 where they were kind of similar, moments where Leclerc was ahead. But this year he'd had a bad season. Didn't help the car, but Leclerc had been doing stuff in the car that Vettel just he couldn't maximise that potential. But snatch last minute podium at Turkey in like the last 3 or 4 corners, I think showed that the old Vettel that used to win championships and has all that experience is still
Yeah, I think he was just a little bit sort of obviously in 2018 he was fighting for that title against Hamilton, but we saw the same with Vettel from when Ricardo joined at Red Bull. I think he just gets a little bit unsettled with um, with a sort of younger on the rise teammate, or maybe it's the team possibly starting to put more of their efforts towards their younger driver because they know that they're the future of the team, and it's just not suiting Vettel's driving style.
yeah
Yeah, almost a little bit like when Ricardo left Red Bull. Obviously, Verstappen, the younger driver coming in, that was clearly their plan for the future to build the team around. So Ricardo felt he would lose out, so sort of jumped ship almost like what Vettel's had to do.
Yeah, definitely. On to number 6 now. We have Ricardo and his 2 podiums. Arguably one of the drivers of the season. Uh, Renault making progress in the right direction. And yeah, he got his podiums at Nürburgring and Imola. He'd been having a stellar performance up until then. And then he was just best of the rest when, Bottas had issues or Verstappen had issues. And he was able to get that win. I remember, or not get that win, get that podium. But I remember it was one of the British Grand Prix as well. He came fourth, and him and Cyril were on the radio, and they were like, "Don't worry, we'll get it soon. We'll get it soon." And then they did.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, I believe that fourth one you're talking about was the race where Hamilton's finish was on 3 tyres, and it was behind Leclerc because that was Leclerc's podium, I believe, at the British Grand Prix, and he was only, I think it was a matter of a second to second and a half behind Leclerc at that point.
Yeah, I think it was pretty close. And then, when they were saying we'll get it soon, I was like, optimistic. But then,
Yeah,
as we saw,
but then
crazy things happened.
it was the same at Spa, though, wasn't it? He was hunting down,
Verstappen.
I believe, Verstappen
Yeah.
on those last laps, taking the fastest lap on the final lap. And if it was a lap or 2 laps longer that race, I think he would have had a podium there as well, with the pace that he was showing late in that race when everyone was struggling on tyres.
Yeah, so great work there from Ricciardo. On to number 5, we have Leclerc and his podiums. Obviously, he got them fairly early on in the season, but dragging that very, very bad Ferrari up into a second and a third, I think has to be commended.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
I think obviously any of these drivers' podiums could be put on this top 10 moments list, but I think Leclerc's has to be on there just because of how poorly that Ferrari performed throughout the season, and the fact that Leclerc was able to bring it up to those positions in 2 races and with sort of multiple top 10 finishes, top 5 finishes. The fact that he was able to do that was impressive by Leclerc. Um, obviously, Ricciardo with his podiums, I think the Renault is a better car, or was a better car than the Ferrari. Um, so yeah, I think just amazing from Leclerc. Obviously, he was on for a podium, Turkey, but I think a few sort of mistakes from Leclerc this season that have sort of shown how difficult the Ferrari is to drive, or maybe it's because Leclerc is because it is so bad at the track that he is making these costly mistakes, which is, he was fourth at Monza when he crashed, and he was in the top 5 at Sakir when he crashed there. So
Yeah, there have been some very good performances from him, but then on the other side, he has, made mistakes that have been either because of the car or, I mean, he said that he's made mistakes like at Turkey, where he missed out on the podium for outbraking himself when he'd made the move. So I think he is definitely one of the drivers of the future, and I think the fact that he's so tough on himself is a good thing because he'll iron out any of those mistakes. But moving on to number 4, just missing out on the podium, we have Norris and his podium at the first Austrian Grand Prix. And the way that he got it, Hamilton had a 5-second penalty, and the meme came out of Strat 7, and my God, was Norris's last lap incredible. Getting fastest lap of the race as well. And I think the gap between him and Hamilton was 4.8 seconds, so imagine to get that first podium. And it was just the start of the great signs that McLaren were back at the front of the midfield.
Yeah, obviously Sainz taking his second podium for McLaren at Monza with that second place to Gasly. I believe if they continue improving, they could be definite contenders for wins in the next coming seasons. Now they'll have the Mercedes power unit.
Yeah, I think we'll touch on it in a bit, but I think next year the midfield is definitely one to watch. And before we get on to our top 3, just some honourable mentions. We have Grosjean, obviously, his crash, getting out of it relatively unscathed, and all the medical people who helped him out. We have Renault maybe on the rise again, because obviously, yes, the midfield was a madness this year, but we had both Ricciardo and Ocon getting their podium. And with Alonso's return next year, who knows what their trajectory will be. And our final honourable mention is Max versus the Mercs, as Max was the only driver who could really challenge the Mercs on a normal race weekend. But onto our third place, we have Gasly winning at Monza. What a redemption story. He's won his race before Albon, the man who replaced it, has even got a podium. And just, yeah, what a high point in the sport. I remember seeing the podium and seeing him just like sat there for a good 5 minutes, just taking it all in, which is it's something we don't normally see because Hamilton's won nearly 100 races now. He's used to it, and it doesn't always show that he not appreciates it, but he doesn't always look like he takes it in. Whereas with Gasly, you could see the emotion, you could see everything. I'm just so gutted that the Tifosi weren't there because I feel like that would have been an even better podium.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Gasly drove his heart out that race. Obviously, he had pressure from Sainz in those last, I think, 20 laps or so. Obviously, Sainz was making his way up the field, but after that, he was in clear air to try and catch him. And they crossed the line with half a second, I think, between them. So I think amazing job from Gasly, and as you say, the redemption story with Red Bull to be able to bring that AlphaTauri to the win, sort of proving that he was that driver that Red Bull signed in 2019.
Yeah, definitely. I think not having the pressure of Verstappen obviously helped. As or that this sort of reset has helped Gasly become an even better driver than he was. But moving on to our runner-up for top 10 moments of the 2020 season, we have Perez's win, and the only reason that I'm saying this beats Gasly's win is because obviously Perez got caught up in that incident on lap 1, started at the back, and the fact that Perez has been in the sport for so long now, and he's always shown that he's such a well-rounded driver. He's got whenever a podium chance has arisen, he's grabbed it. And the weekend before, he had an engine failure and missed out on a good result. The fact that he's been dropped from Racing Point when he had a multi-year contract, and just to win it was just something I think the sport needs to see.
Yeah, from a midfield driver, I think Perez being able to come from the back of the grid on lap 1 and take the win was just amazing, and sort of showed that he definitely deserves a seat for the next season.
Yeah, and moving on now to our winner of top 10 moments. It's none other than Hamilton getting 7 titles. You can say the best car argument, you can say this, that, the other, but at the moment we are witnessing history. People never thought Fangio's record would be beaten, and then Schumacher came along and added 2 more to it. People never thought Schumacher's record would be touched, and now Hamilton's just breaking all of his records. And I think, well, if he re-signs for next year is probably going to be another title to add, and then 2022 is a different story, but just a great drive all season from Hamilton.
Yeah, like you say, I don't think anyone expected Schumacher's record to be, or anyone to get even close to that record, and for that to be equal and possibly even beaten if he is re-signed to Mercedes. I think it'll be, like you say, we're witnessing history. It's going to be in the sport forever from now on. So to be able to watch it live is amazing, and obviously, yeah, he might not be people might not like him as a person, but as a driver, really have to respect him because he's been able to win, close to 100 races. So yeah, I personally myself, I don't really like him, but I definitely respect him as a driver.
Yeah, I'm very much the same. He is in the best car. If he had Verstappen as a teammate, would he have won? What? How many years has he been at Mercedes? 7 or 8. Would he have won 6 championships? Probably not. But then, he's shown himself to be the best driver, arguably, of the field, and that he can sort of mould the team around him. Be like, I want Bottas. I want someone who can be a good second teammate and not challenge. And yeah, if he resigns next year, I'm sure I hope Red Bull can make the step up and Max can fight him for a championship, but realistically, I think Hamilton's most likely to win the championship next year if he does resign. But now we're just gonna look through go through the teams, talk about the drivers. We've touched on a lot of points already, but we'll just give a general overview of the season. So, starting off with Williams, who finished in last place, 0 points. Yeah, it's just not looking good for. Well, I say not looking good for them. It wasn't a good season, but with Frank and Claire stepping down, obviously a huge loss for the sport, but I think a necessary one. And with their new investment, I know it's recently come out that in 2022 they're going to have a bigger technical relationship with Mercedes, which is very un-Williams-like. So hopefully this is the lowest of lows, and they can start to bring themselves back up. Because I mean, from 2019 to 2020, there was huge improvements if you look at pace-wise and how far they were off even the rest of the pack, like the Haas and the Alfa Romeo. Now for Russell to get multiple Q2 appearances, I think shows that they're making a step in the right direction.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think Williams are back on. I think they're back on track, as it were. They're making progress back, sort of midfield. Obviously, it wasn't too long ago that they were fighting for podium and things like that. So,
Yeah,
with sort
2017,
of,
I think, was a
pardon?
podium year for them. If I'm right, 2017,
Yeah, I
they were
think
still
Stroll
getting
got a
podium.
Yeah, and obviously, I think they're back on that track of moving back towards the front. Obviously, now that, like you say, Frank and Claire stepping down, although that is a shame, like you say, I think it is a necessary one, and it has um, given them that sort of cash injection to be able to develop the car more and sort of make strides towards the midfield. And if you look at the qualifying times from 2020 compared to 2019, they were the biggest gain in time throughout the entire field. So I think the next couple of years we should probably watch out for Williams, because I think they are going to be on the rise.
Yeah, definitely. I think Russell's had a big part in their development.
Yeah, that is one thing that I'm worried about is if, I'm sure in the next couple of years, Russell will probably move to Mercedes. When they lose him, or if they lose him, I don't really see Latifi. I mean, Latifi could develop. It was only his first year, but I don't see Latifi being that, you know, first driver to lead them. And then they had Aitken in the car for when Russell got promoted to Mercedes, and it's hard to tell from one race, but it's whether they have that star driver to replace George Russell.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, I believe it 6 or 7 Q2 appearances Russell made last season
Yeah, I
in
think it
that
might have been
Williams.
7. Yeah.
It was an impressive amount given what he was driving. When you think Latifi, I believe, made it in once. Maybe not even that. I think he did make it in once though, didn't he?
I think it was one.
It does show the difference that the driver does make to the car. Obviously, Latifi averaging probably a 17th or 18th position qualifying, whereas Russell was competing and getting into Q2.
Yeah.
I'd say often enough to actually say regularly.
Yeah, 100%. So it'll be interesting to see how they continue to develop next year. I think, well, all the teams will be looking for 2022 and the new Rex, but I think Williams will be hoping to make a big jump to back into the midfield to be, fighting for points regularly. But moving now on to ninth place in the championship, we have Haas, who once again, like Alfa Romeo and Ferrari were hit by this Ferrari engine malarkey, whatever went on. And it wasn't even that, they didn't have a good car. In 2019 we saw them switching halfway between, or in the season halfway between, Australia spec and the new upgrades, and they were all over the place with their development. This year they didn't have that problem. They weren't quick. I think the only race that stands out to me is Hungary, where it was like half raining at the start, and they decided to come in and put the softs on, or put on slick tyres, while everyone else started on wets or winters. And because it's Hungary, it's difficult to overtake, and they managed to score some points out of that. But yeah, very disappointing season from Haas.
Yeah,
I'm not sure how much to say about Haas really, because obviously, both drivers having a bit of a tough season. Obviously they were in good form. 2018, I think 2018 was probably one of their best seasons. And they were looking good to be sort of challenging for podiums, and the top three teams chances. Obviously, they did score points, um, but yeah, um, quite, I think, lucky point, I would probably say.
Can you just repeat what you said, because it cut out? I'll edit this bit out though.
Okay. um, I think the points that Haas did score were quite sort of lucky points in in their races. Obviously, in comparison, who were looking at points multiple times but just couldn't quite stick the landing, if you will, and score those. But Haas, with their sort of maybe a possibly better car, just able to get a few more points.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see what a brand new lineup for them next year of two youngsters coming in is able to do. Obviously, it's a controversial subject as well, that the lineup for next year for Haas. So
Yeah, I'm excited to see the Schumacher name back in. I think it's maybe good that he's in a low car, because I know in F2 and F3 he sort of had to take the first season as sort of a warm up, if you like, getting used to everything, and then that second season is where he's come through and won the championship, or fought for the championship. So I'm excited to see what happens on that side. But yeah, like you say, the other side with Mazepin, I mean, I don't want to go into it too much, but I think the air quotations as punishment isn't harsh enough. Has an F1 have been like, we're going to deal with this internally, which I don't think is the right thing to do. But money makes the world go around, and because his dad's a Russian billionaire, it's unfortunately
yeah,
more than likely going to be swept under the rug.
yeah, I think Haas did confirm that he is still a definite starter for next year in their lineup, that they're not going to replace him. So
Which I also find is such a shame when you have other Ferrari young drivers like Eilert. I know Schwartzman had a great first season in F2. Them missing out because of money, basically.
yeah,
So I suppose all
yeah,
we can hope for is
absolutely.
that money does help them get up the grid, because I mean, Haas are the newest team in F1, and I feel like if things don't turn around, I don't see it being a good investment, and I feel like they might leave if they
Yeah,
don't start
yeah,
producing better performances. But moving on to
yeah,
8th place, we have Alfa Romeo, who just like has hindered by the Ferrari engine, Kimi and Giovinazzi both getting 4 points each. Again, it's just not where they want to be, really. You know, they had a
Yeah, I think, like you say, that they're so hindered by that Ferrari engine, that it's difficult to get anywhere, in the races. Obviously, Kimi, being that sort of legend of the sport in the car, um, if he can't bring that car to a good result, then it's obviously not the driver. And both drivers scoring the same amount of points, I think it um, puts the drivers on like the same sort of level of driving. I think Kimi and Giovinazzi are probably quite level in obviously this season, the same amount of points, um, with their races. I think Giovinazzi making a few more mistakes than Kimi during the season. Um, but it's still good to see Kimi around. He's been in it a long, long time. So it's nice to see that he's still got that drive.
yeah, it'll be 10 years time. There'll be new regulations, new engines, but Kimi will probably still be doing his favourite hobby and just driving around.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just not a lot to say on them, really. We hardly ever see them uh, on the F1 feed because they're at the back, not really fighting anyone. And yeah, I remember when Leclerc was at Alfa Romeo, or I think it just transitioned from Sauber to Alfa Romeo. They had such a good season, and Leclerc was doing excellent in it. And then from there, they just haven't had the star driver that they need. Like the fact that Giovinazzi is on par with Kimi, Kimi used to be a great driver. He's still decent, but he's just not at that same caliber as like a Leclerc or a Verstappen or a Ricciardo. I just feel like they need that one special driver to get them points when there's the slimmest of chance.
Yeah, I agree.
And now moving on to number 7 in the championship is Alpha Tauri. A fairly I'm going to say up and down. The way how I view Alpha Tauri is they're in the midfield and they have the potential to be at the top of the midfield, but their performances are so peaky that they're always at the bottom of the midfield, but then sometimes will shoot up to the top. They're never that consistent front runner of the midfield.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Gasly taking that win in Monza and was looking at a podium at Imola had he not retired. But obviously, I think it was a bit sort of um, hit and miss when it came to their results. Either they did well or they just couldn't find the pace.
Yeah, speaking of Imola as well, congratulations to Kvyat because he did come 4th in that race, which was his best result of the season. And I feel like it's maybe a bit overlooked because of the Ricciardo podium. But yeah, they need to find that development pathway to put them more into the midfield. Like if you turned up to a random race weekend and you're asked to name 3 teams that would be the top of the midfield, you'd say McLaren, Racing Point, Renault. They need to start making their way up into that group to get consistent points. And I feel like Red Bull might help them out, seeing as Racing Point have had massive helps from Mercedes. I know there was a bit of controversy early on in the year with the Tracing Point scandal, which docked them points, which ended up costing them 3rd in the championship. But I feel like Red Bull needs, or AlphaTauri needs, that closer relationship with Red Bull.
Yeah.
But yeah, moving on to 6th place, woeful for their standards, was Ferrari. We touched on it. Bad engine. Not only a bad engine, but a bad car because they designed a very drag-heavy car that had lots of downforce, thinking that they'd have this incredible engine, and then they don't have this incredible engine anymore, and they have a very draggy car. There was only, there were some standout performances like Leclerc with his podiums at Austria and Britain, but then he did also make mistakes. And yeah, Vettel also had a pretty horrid season. Most races he'd be racing Kimi and Russell and battling for position for like P14 with them. So definitely not the season that they needed.
Yeah, I think it was one of their worst seasons since like the 80s. I think it was a awful season for Ferrari, and like you say, they thought that they had this amazing engine, and then when they got to Austria, they realized how slow they were in comparison um, to the rest of the field, and even to the previous car from the last year. They were down on their qualifying times by nearly a second, I think, at almost every single race. And it was definitely, I would say, obviously the aero was pretty bad, but the main problem with that car was the engine.
Yeah, it was a horrible season. The only, maybe silver lining to it is that with the new performance regulations that are coming in, they get more time in the wind tunnel, so they're probably not looking for uh, rise back to the normal Ferrari expectations next year. Although I have heard rumours that they've apparently got a really good engine, but I'll take that with a pinch of salt.
Yeah, that has been. I think it was Bonotto who's been saying about that like the engine is looking good for um, next year. How true that is, we don't know. To be honest, I think he's probably overestimating it a little bit, um, like he did with this year's car. But we can only wait and see, really, see what happens.
Yeah, I think they're definitely going to be holding out till 2022, and they need to be back at the front because it's just there are so
Yeah,
much high expectations for Ferrari. This just isn't acceptable for them. And I think they've got
yeah,
Leclerc. He is arguably in line to be one of the future championship champions. Blah, don't know why my words couldn't come out then. After Hamilton, you've got Hamilton, Verstappen, Leclerc. They're arguably the future champions, so they need to give him the car to perform and get the results back. Because 2017, 2018, I still think if Vettel hadn't made so many mistakes and Ferrari had really kept pushing, they could have won the championship. Because I remember thinking Vettel could have walked away with the first 4 races as wins, but he had like instances in China. He had a massive lock up at Baku, which cost him. So they need to get back on top of it because it's been their last championship was 2008. At this point, they're
uh, yeah,
turning into almost a Williams sort of team. They need to get back up to the top quick.
yeah. I agree.
And then moving on to 5th place, we have Renault. Again, a decent season from them. I think they'll be disappointed because when they came back in 2016, they were like, "We've got this 5-year plan. We're going to get back to the top." And then 2016 obviously was a bad season because they inherited the Lotus from the year before, basically. 2017 was good. I think they were battling the Haas for best of the rest. 2018 they got fourth in the championship, and then 2019 and 2020 they've just, I don't know if they've fallen back or just kind of stood still, while Racing Point and McLaren especially, have just sort of propelled themselves ahead.
Yeah, that was a point that I was gonna sort of give when we got onto this one. Is I feel Renault, they massively improved from the 2019 season, but they didn't improve as much as Racing Point and McLaren did, which almost gave them the appearance of going backwards.
Yeah, there were some tracks where they were incredible at. Like, I know their Renault concept is very good at the low speed circuits. We saw it in 2019 and in 2020 around like Belgium and Italy. They were rapid, but I think they need to concentrate on maybe more, I don't know whether it's high speed or low speed. And I think, personally, I think it's a shame that Ricciardo's left and that they're getting Fernando in. Although I do think Fernando's a great driver, we saw what happened with McLaren. He dragged them down. As soon as he leaves, and he's not like bossing the team around, they make a comeback. So I hope Renault can keep pushing forward, or Alpine as they'll be known as this year.
And obviously, it was today that it was announced that Cyril Abiteboul is leaving.
Yeah, that is a strange one, because we've seen it before with like Ferrari when Arriva Bene was team principal. If he wasn't doing the job, he'd be out. But I don't feel like Cyril's not been doing the job. I feel like he's, they got podiums this year. That's an improvement. Yes, I think ideally they wanted to get podiums in 2018 or 2019, but they're still getting podiums, and they do look like they're on the right track. So it's a bit weird. I know we talked a bit before the podcast about, is it Fernando who's, sort of forcing their hand? Which, if it is, I think it's a shame, because Fernando's a driver, not a, team principal, or he shouldn't have the power to boss around what happens in the team. I just hope it doesn't impact them going forward.
Yeah, and if that is the case of that's the reason he's leaving and he's sort of pushing his weight around, could there have been a better option for him, for Renault to take on, obviously, young drivers, the like of Zhou, although he had an unfortunate season? I feel the younger drivers in F1 have started to prove themselves as a good option.
Yeah, definitely, because there was this whole consensus even of older drivers being better and that experience paying off. But now, we've had Russell, Lando, Leclerc, we've got Tsunoda coming in next year, Gasly, all these young drivers showing that the old drivers, yes, they have experience, but
Yuki Tsunoda,
it doesn't take away from. But yeah, you were saying about Tsunoda.
Yeah, Yuki Tsunoda, I feel, is going to be an amazing talent to watch. Obviously, his first season in F2 took P3 overall, and some of the moves, I know obviously F2 is an equal car based championship, which allows for the closer racing that you do see, but based on the fact that they're in equal cars means that the driving that he's pulling off when he's doing these last two top three finishes that he was doing, it just shows how good a driver he is, and the moves that he makes, it's very almost Ricardo-esque. Is late braking, going for a gap that most might not consider, a bit like Verstappen as well. So I feel if he was given a really strong car, which hopefully AlphaTauri can do next year again and compete for podiums like they were looking like they would do this year, it could go really well for him.
Yeah, and now moving on to number 4th in the championship, we have Racing Point. Obviously, they had Perez doing well. If I'm being totally honest, I think they would have been expecting 3rd. They had what everyone called and it was effectively the 2019 Mercedes. They should have been third in the constructors. They did have, I think it was 18 points taken away from them for their brake ducts being the same as Mercedes. And then they missed out on, you know, Stroll at Turkey potentially could have scored more points, and he also had a crash at the crash at Mugello might have, or definitely did knock his confidence. Perez missed out on great results in. It was the first Bahrain race and even at Abu Dhabi. So I think it was obviously a good turnaround from 2019 because they didn't have the best season, but still, I think they would have hoped for more.
Yeah, I think they obviously with that points deduction, they would have been third in the constructors. So had they not had that sort of scandal at the start of the season, they would have got that third. But to be only like one position down after having those points taken away, I think is still good for them. And if they continue their development and copy the 2020 car, then they're looking good for next season.
Yeah, and now moving on to third place, which is best of the rest. We have McLaren. Just an incredible effort all around. At some points, it didn't look like they were as strong. I think it was Mugello. They introduced their new narrow front wing, and it took them a few races to get it all sorted out. But they had a standout performance, progressing from fourth in the championship in 2019 to third now. Obviously helped by Ferrari not being there. But you had Sainz who pulled off some amazing races. I think he should have won at Monza, but the red flag meant that Gasly pulled off a win, or didn't pull off a win, but he was in prime position to take the win. And Norris obviously getting the podium. I think he missed out on another good performance at Nürburgring because he had an issue. But yeah, it's good to see them. I'm going to say back in the top three. I know they're not really fighting Red Bull and Mercedes, but hopefully maybe next year, 2022, they can be fighting for wins regularly.
Yeah, and even if not wins, just a regular sort of getting that third place on the podium would be start. Obviously, they got a few, so even just making it a regular thing would be a big improvement, and it would make the races a lot more interesting as well. Having a third team, if Ferrari don't improve and get back what they've lost last season, having 4 or 5 teams all competing for the podiums close would really bring it all back.
Yeah, that is the dream. And now moving on to second place in the championship, we have Red Bull. We've touched on them a little bit. Obviously, Max, a standout season. He arguably should have got second in the championship, but had 5 retirements. I think 4 of them weren't his fault. They were mechanical, or he got hit by people from behind. He had quite a few lonely races where he wasn't as quick as the Mercs, but was quicker than everyone else. But I think, great performance from him all year round. Albon, on the other hand, definitely not what he wanted or Red Bull wanted. Lacking that consistency. Maybe it's the car being more suited to Max. I think we'll find out in this season with Perez being there. I hope it's not the same with Perez that we've seen with Gasly and Albon, that they just can't get a handle on the car. But I think they, especially towards the end of the season, they were starting to close that gap to Mercedes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
obviously. Oh, sorry.
No, you go.
Obviously, Verstappen taking pole at Abu Dhabi and then going on to win the race. I believe he led from start to finish and thought he'd done the Grand Slam almost as it is, until Ricardo took fastest lap on the final lap of the race. which sort of stole that away from him a bit. So if they could start the season off with that momentum instead of finishing it, that would be great in my opinion for the sake of F1.
Yeah, I know we've got slight rule changes from last year to this year, with the floor being cut out a little bit and the some changes to the diffuser. And I'm pretty sure it was either Helmut Marko or Christian Horner came out saying that next year's car is going to be 60% of last year's car. So hopefully with the development they made, because I know Mercedes stopped about halfway through developing their car, that development can pay off and they can push Mercedes next year and maybe even fight for championships, I'm going to say, hopefully. But yeah, they obviously have lots of innovation. I know their front end was quite innovative this year. They had holes in the end plates of their front wings. So they're obviously trying everything they can to close that gap to Mercedes. But yeah, fingers crossed, next year we can have, or this year even, we can have Max and Hamilton fighting for the championship. But that just leaves us with Mercedes, doing another standout job, winning both titles once again. Hamilton smashing out the park, breaking all the records possible, equaling most poles, most wins. The list just goes on and on and on. Bottas not doing such a good job, and I think that's where Red Bull might have a chance next year, is if Perez can be that rear gunner for Verstappen, they can stop putting Bottas under pressure, and then maybe even Hamilton under pressure.
Yeah, I think next year is going to be a bit more interesting in terms of the championship fight. Hopefully, like you said, Red Bull is closer, but there's no guarantee of that. But yeah, I think Mercedes pretty much had the title from the first race. Although I did read that going into Australia, they actually had a few reliability issues with the car, and that they wouldn't have been as strong as they were at the start or in Australia as they were in Austria. But those few extra months where obviously the world sort of shut down gave them that time to develop the engine even more, to the point where the car was just unstoppable, with either Hamilton or what seemed like Bottas at the start of the season. It looked like he was on to sort of be there to challenge Hamilton and sort of push him and push each other for that championship. But Hamilton just again on another level compared to Bottas, and just an insanely dominant season for both cars.
So to kind of wrap things up, let's do a best of 2020 season. So who are your guys' best driver of the season?
I think that's a difficult one. I think I'd probably have to go with Max, to be honest. He's been, although he's been let down with retirements, he's still clinched that third place in the drivers, even though I guess it wasn't that. And I think without those retirements, he probably would have got Bottas as well. And to be sort of the only driver to be able to challenge those Mercedes up front is a great effort from him. So yeah, I think it would have to be Verstappen for me.
I'm going to go with Ricciardo. I think I agree with what you said with Verstappen, but I think the midfield is so tight, anyone can be best of the rest each weekend, and Ricciardo pulled out some stunning performances. It's obviously hard to rank which midfield car was the best, because you could say Racing Point was the best, and then where would you put Renault and McLaren? But I feel like next year, in that McLaren with a Mercedes engine, Ricciardo's going to be one to watch, and if I was him, I'd be eyeing up that fifth position in the championship.
Yeah, so my options were the two that you've taken. So to keep it interesting, I'm going to go for Lando Norris. Teammates with Ricciardo. They've got the Mercedes power unit on that McLaren coming in. So hopefully, from what we were talking about earlier, McLaren can really bring it back and start competing, as a McLaren with Norris and Ricciardo has the potential to be a really strong championship competitor. So, but yeah, my one to watch was Norris for best driver, to be honest. So it'd be nice to see him do better next season.
All right, moving on to best race of 2020. I'm going to go with Turkey, because I think that the whole unpredictableness, the track having zero grip, seeing history being made was just something incredible. And it's those one-off races where everything happens. There's, the whole race is upside down. You don't know what's going to happen. At the best, that's not me saying that I want them every time, because otherwise they'd lose their specialness. But yeah, I think that's my best race of 2020.
Yeah, I agree, but to be honest, I think my best race would probably be Monza. I think that whole sort of um, Mercedes out of the situation kind of race was really interesting to watch, to see um, who would take that win. I mean, it completely left the podium, the entire podium this time, not just like third place. It left the entire podium up for grabs, and obviously Gasly managed to get away with it and take that win. Stroll, I think, I think he was on pole for the restart, but unfortunately picked it up. So in terms of like how unpredictable it was, I think I think Monza was probably the best one, just for the final result and seeing a good race without Mercedes.
On to me now then. For me, it would have to have been uh, the outer ring of Bahrain in the Sakar Grand Prix. Just although it didn't go the way a lot of people wanted with Russell, it was probably the most exciting race of the year, due to the amount of sort of differing factors that were brought in to change the end result. Obviously, the Perez win. Then you had Stroll there as well. No, did you? Yeah, along with Ocon. A massive points haul for them, for those four. So yeah, it was Russell, unfortunate, making his way back through, then got the puncher again. So for edge of the seat racing and sort of pure excitement, I'd have to go with that race.
Yeah, I think that would have been my favourite one, but I was very hungover that day and kind of didn't watch the race all the way through. I was kind of in and out. But I think any of the three races could have been best race of 2020. And finally, best team. I'm going to say McLaren, because looking from where they were to where they are, if they can keep this trajectory, soon enough they'll be back to fight for championships.
I think, although I don't really like the team, I'm probably going to have to go with Mercedes, to be quite honest. They've been so dominant throughout the entire season, and although, like I say, I don't really like them, they've still done so well to be able to get that car so fast. And in qualifying, it was about 1 second. At the start of the season, it was about 1 second quicker in qualifying than the rest of the pack, which when you look at it, is amazing. If you think that a couple of years ago, the whole grid was separated by that gap, and now obviously the top team is taking off and setting those records and things like that. I think even though they're not my favourite team, um, they were the best team of the season.
Yeah, so based on sort of or what Josh has said with the McLaren, I'll go for a different one. And based on that, I'm going to say Williams, which is a very odd choice considering they finished with no points and not an amazing season, really. But the improvement that they had from the 2019 season to the 2020 season in terms of their qualifying times at each track and their actual race pace, the improvement was the biggest on the field. So if they were to be able to do that again, obviously they wouldn't be champion or fighting for best of the rest, but I could definitely see them getting a good points haul, hopefully, in the next season or two, should they stick with this development and a strong driver lineup.
Yeah, I agree. You know, it's a bit of an out there choice, but if they can keep this trajectory, then you know we want to see Williams back at the front. So just to finish off, what is one thing you two are looking forward to in the 2021 season?
For me, it would have to be my two favourite drivers at my favourite team of Ricciardo and Norris at McLaren. So, yeah, bring on the 2021 season because I can't wait for that.
I say McLaren as well, but more towards the car. I think the McLaren with that Mercedes engine is going to be pretty rapid, and I'm excited to see if it lives up to my expectations or if it is sort of going to fall back down the field a little bit. But yeah, I'm excited to see either way what happens.
I was going to pick McLaren too, but I'll go with Red Bull. I think seeing Perez in that car, finally getting a chance at a top team. I know he was with McLaren, but they were kind of on their downward slope at that point. I think, well, I'm hoping Max and Perez can take the fight to Mercedes and maybe challenge for one of the championships. Just make it interesting because I love that midfield fight. But everyone wants to see a fight for the win and a fight for the championship. We've not had a real championship decider now since 2016. So I'm hoping with everything that Red Bull can close that gap. But that has been the first ever TTM Talks podcast. We hope you all enjoyed. Be sure to go follow us on Twitch, Instagram, subscribe to the YouTube, and follow us on Twitter. I know I personally produce top 10 moments on YouTube. We have lots of Instagram posts going out with all of our races that happen. And if you want to go watch our races live, follow our Twitch. We are live on Monday, Wednesday, Thursdays, and Fridays. And that's it from us. Next week, we'll be talking about our Tier 1, the top tier at TTMotorsports, as we finish our season this week. And we'll be giving a little bit of a review on that. So, again, I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next week.